Welcome everyone, and thank you so much for joining our webinar today, Surviving the Storm of Test Automation. My name is Brent Jenkins. I'm the Marketing Manager here at Checkpoint Technologies, and I will be your moderator. Joining me today is the presenters, Bob Cruz, our President, and Dean Carvin, Director of Professional Services. Let's start with you, Bob. Why don't you tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
Well, first off, I'd like to thank everybody for joining us today. As Brent mentioned, really happy to have you join us for this very informative webinar. So I've been in IT for about 28 years. I started off as an IBM DB2 COBOL developer. I've provided consulting and services throughout the entire software development life cycle. And then in the mid-90s, when we saw software testing and quality assurance start getting more respect, I developed a keen interest in that as well as in test automation. And then in 2003, started Checkpoint Technologies, in which our focus is quality assurance, quality control. So again, thank you everybody for joining us. And I'm very excited to introduce Dean Carvin. Dean?
Thank you, Bob. So I'll join Brent and Bob in thanking everyone for joining the webinar today. So I'm Dean Carvin, Director of Professional Services for Checkpoint Technology. So I've been in the IT field for about 16 years, now going on 17 years, the entire time in QA, and actually focused on automation from the beginning. So it was trial by fire there in the beginning. And just have a passion for developing the best automation, most robust, reliable automation that you can possibly create for your organization. So that's me in a nutshell.
Great, thank you so much, guys. So a little bit about Checkpoint Technologies before we get started. We started in January of 2003, and our headquarters is located in sunny Tampa, Florida. Our area of expertise is in quality assurance and quality control, specifically when it comes to functional, performance, and application security testing. We are a Hewlett-Packard Enterprise Gold Partner, Authorized Software Support Partner, and an HPE Certified Training Partner. We are also proud partners with Mobile Labs, Turnkey Solutions, Zephyr, and now our newest partner, which we are very excited to say, Atlassian. Atlassian is the leader in software development software such as Jira, Confluence, and Bitbucket. Along with that, we are also affiliated with QAI Worldwide, so if you ever need training courses on things like the Essentials in Software Testing or Boot Camp for Business Analysts, we can provide that to you. As far as some of the professional services we provide, there's staff augmentation, which can be long or short-term, on-site or remote. We also provide consulting, outsourcing, which is our version of offshoring, where we can house a team for you here at our headquarters. Then there's education, structured classroom training, or tailored mentoring, where we'll go on-site in your environment and educate your team how to use a solution where real work gets done. A little bit of housekeeping before we get started. This is a live webinar, but it is being recorded, so all registrants will receive a copy of that link within 24 hours. And we will be doing a Q&A session at the end of the webinar, but we encourage you to submit questions at any point in time, and I may interrupt the presentation with some of those questions if they're, if they apply. So,
and absolutely, we do love questions. So yeah, please.
Yeah. Just to show you, we are using GoToWebinar today. So the control panel you should see on your screen, just submit the questions in that question box, hit send, and we will get to them as many questions as you can. And if we don't get to them by the end of the webinar, we will be sending them out in a few weeks afterwards. So we'll make sure to get to everybody's questions. I just wanted to remind everybody of the key takeaways for today, which is common challenges organizations have when implementing test automation, benefits of implementing a test automation framework, techniques and strategies utilizing a robust automation framework technology, and a real-world proven solution to overcome challenges and realize a rapid ROI. So before we get started, and also I wanted to mention as a physical takeaway for today's webinar, everyone joining us will receive a copy of our brand new white paper on this very subject of surviving the storm of test automation. So before we get started, I thought we'd do a poll to see how valuable you think an automation framework would be to your organization right now. So I'm going to go ahead and launch that poll. the question for it is, implementing a robust automation framework would benefit our organization. Do you strongly agree? Do you agree? Are you unsure, disagree, or strongly disagree? So we're going to take a few seconds to let everybody joining us take that poll. Just about everybody's taken the poll so far. We're going to wait just a few more seconds. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close that poll now. So it looks like 67% of you here today strongly agree that it would benefit your organization. 30% agree. Only 3% disagree. So I want to get both you guys' intake, Bob and Dean, on the results of that poll. But let's start with you, Dean.
So yeah, thanks, Brent. This is really interesting. I'm pretty excited about these results, honestly. It's good to see that most people at least agree that an automation framework will benefit the organization. Strongly agree, fantastic. Looks like maybe one or two folks disagree. A possible reason for that is, there's a number of organizations that have attempted automation organization and then even an automation framework, trying to take it to the next level. They're challenging to develop. So that could be maybe from a result of a failed attempt and possibly a couple failed attempts. So hopefully we'll move those disagree back up to the agree. What do you think, Bob?
Yeah, that's a great point, Dean. So the other thing that it could be with the folks that disagree is, Dean and I have been in test automation for many, many years. I mean, I started off in 1998, Dean shortly after that. And one of the things that we certainly understand and agree is that a framework is not necessarily right for every single project. It's not a one-size-fits-all. So perhaps those that disagree have done the due diligence and analysis and determined that for their project, the framework is not the way to go.
Great, thank you, guys. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Bob to kick off the presentation. Take it away, Bob.
Fantastic. And everybody, as Brent mentioned earlier, we are headquartered in Tampa. We're supposed to get a storm tomorrow. So hopefully the title of this storm, we don't have to take literally tomorrow. And if you hear thunder in the background, you can just consider it that we viewed up some extra sound effects for this presentation.
The production quality is really high for this one.
Exactly. So the first thing I'm going to talk about just briefly is the benefits of test automation. I'm sure everybody on the webinar is very familiar with automation and the fact that having a solid test automation environment and strategy enables you to deploy higher quality applications faster. And why is that? Well, the fact of the matter is when it's done correctly, you are able to test significantly more in less execution time. So that allows greater coverage. So that means that you can actually validate a greater number of requirements in the same or less period of time. And one of the ways you can do that is by utilizing unattended and distributed test execution. So maybe I have 1,000 automated test cases and I'm going to execute 200 of them on Dean's machine, 100 on Brent's machine, and so on, and I'm going to schedule those to kick off tonight at midnight. And with that, you're able to realize a much greater return on investment. So both from the direct benefits of something like savings in manual labor effort, as well as indirect, so you can improve risk avoidance, if you will. And another nice benefit of test automation, when done correctly, is that it's able to provide very robust analytics and reports. So if we look at the evolution of test automation, I mean, think about it for just a moment. Initially, I remember back when I was a COBOL developer, we did test automation by developing our own source code in-house. And that's still being done, and that works for a lot of organizations. And then it's gone up through screen scrapers, record and replay, where the downside was that the screen resolution could have an impact. And now we're at the point it has evolved where you see a lot of automation frameworks becoming very, very prevalent. So when it comes to test automation, well, what could possibly go wrong? So Dean and I, in the many organizations we've assisted and have provided consulting for, have found that there are certain common challenges that jump out. Many organizations tend to lack the automation expertise. So that might be expertise with the scripting. So whatever programming language, the solution, whether it's Selenium and you're using Java, or maybe it's UFT, which is using VB script. It might be a lack of automation expertise when it comes to the solution itself or with the strategy. We see a lot of organizations try to treat test automation with the same approach as they do manual testing. And that is definitely a mistake that is quite common and that you want to avoid. Another common challenge, they fail to consider what should and should not be automated. I always get a little nervous when I hear somebody say that they know without a doubt that they're going to automate 100% of your test cases. That simply is very, very uncommon. I'm not saying it's impossible. And we see organizations that will automate what should be left manual, or they will leave manual what should be automated. They also fail to consider the maintenance effort and how to decrease that using good automation practices, as well as a need for training and education. Organizations often ignore policies, or I should say they ignore developing policies, guidelines, and standards, and they fail to track the progress and return on investment. So if leadership in an organization does not see where there's an ROI, then a lot of times the leadership will stop supporting its utilization. So how can we decrease the automation challenges? Well, Dean and I brainstormed, and we came up with some very specific granular areas that you can look to improve. So to decrease the maintenance on your automation effort, one of the things to keep in mind is that you should implement an automation design that is modular. So it should be reusable, robust, reliable, scalable, and flexible. And the key thing to think about here that you've got to take into account is that modularity requires strong planning. So you've got to do that early on in the project. If your goal is to better track the progress of your test automation initiative, it's important that you manage expectations of team members as well as management and develop standards, best practices, and guidelines. Get everybody on the same page. And doing that also, by the way, helps decrease maintenance. Define metrics and reporting and establish success criteria. So for success criteria, you might determine, all right, what percentage of our test cases are we going to automate? What percentage are we going to leave manual? How are we going to track and cover and ensure we're successful at automating business processes and that they are reusable? What kind of metrics are we going to come up with? And what kind of traceability are we going to track? Because for your automated testing, you want to make sure that they are validating those requirements that they're supposed to cover. Another thing to take a look at is test cycle execution times. One that I recommend clients focus on right from the beginning is regression testing. Because as I'm sure everybody knows, that's an area where you can get a large return on investment when you focus on regression testing, because it is just so labor intensive.
So Bob, let me jump in for a second here. You just talked about establishing success criteria, the automation versus manual. And a couple of slides ago, you mentioned during the challenges is people trying to automate things that should stay manual and vice versa. One of the questions that came in just a minute ago, I thought applied to both of those, was what percentage of your test cases is it realistic to automate?
So I typically tell organizations without doing an analysis, Brent, a general average is if you can automate 70% of your test cases, you're doing great. And when I say when you can automate, I'm also referring to that you should automate.
Should automate, absolutely.
So typically about 70% you can and should automate, and 30% normally you should leave manual. You know, things like when you're testing usability, things like that. Great.
Thank you, Bob.
So, absolutely.
And that goes back, if you don't mind me interrupting, that goes back to managing expectations, because perception is everything. Lots of times managers will have the idea that let's just automate everything. They say, what do you want us to automate? Everything. Well, that may require you somehow educating the managers on automation and the possibilities of automation. And again, the 70% goal is a good goal to have. Not every organization can meet that goal. But you know, perception, when you have a team of automation engineers heads down working hard, if management's expecting that to result in tests the next week or the following week, that may not happen. They have to understand that there's an investment in time when you're developing an in-house solution from scratch. A lot of automation fails just because they pull the plug before the product is actually ready to be released to automate your test.
Yep. Yeah, great. Thank you, Dean. So to increase success overall, you should absolutely consider a framework. So just to make sure we're all on the same page, a framework is a structured automation methodology designed to create, execute, manage, and maintain automated scripts for an organization's test automation projects. So some types of frameworks might be business process or functional decomposition. It might be a data-driven framework, keyword-driven, or a hybrid. So a common hybrid is where you're utilizing both. It's a part data-driven and it's part keyword-driven. And frameworks can be very successful in an agile environment. Some of the benefits of a robust framework: it helps provide a very clear automation methodology. Everybody's on the same page. It reduces script maintenance, and it eases automated scripts development. And Dean's going to chat about that a little bit more in a moment. It decreases the need for the amount of technical expertise. So you still need some technical expertise on your team, but you don't need as many technical experts. People don't have to be programming experts. It minimizes the automation learning curve. It allows development of automated scripts sooner. So once you've got your framework in place, if you know that a push button is going to be developed and you've got to validate that it's in a specific state, specific position on the screen, you can start creating the process, the automated process, even before that push button is developed. And as you can see, with all of these taken into account, it maximizes the return on investment.
Bob, I'm going to jump in real quick one more time, just for some clarification. On the last slide, talking about the different types of test automation frameworks, a question came in that said, I've always heard modularity as a type of framework. Why wasn't this on your list?
Well,
I'll take that if you don't. On that, since you're kind of the framework guru. So why don't you take that one, Dean?
That's not even so high expectations, Brent, but thanks. But so modularity is a principle of a good automation framework. Okay, it's a property of one. So any of those types of frameworks should have a modular structure, meaning that there should only be one set of code in the tool that's being used for the automation to represent a single process in your application under test. If you have to copy that code somewhere, have multiple instances of that same code, then you're killing yourself in maintenance. If that process changes, you don't have one place of modification. You have however many places that code has been duplicated. You have to go back and find all those steps, find all those tests that utilize that code, make those changes. That's just because so modularity is not a framework type. It's really a property of a strong framework. Hope that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does. That's perfect, Dean. Thanks. So some of the pitfalls with a framework, it's not all rainbows and unicorns. So a framework, it does require some very senior resources to develop the framework. The initial automation progress may be slow. I mean, one of the things we consider ourselves experts at is developing the framework while we're automating the processes. So some automation is getting done, but it's a little bit slower. More detailed upfront planning is necessary. And to be honest with you, that's not necessarily a bad thing. It might be complex or difficult to use if it's not built in a solid, scalable way, and thus the framework could be likely to fail. And then if it's a non-modular framework with lots of duplicate code, well, that could be very, very risky. So how can we decrease the framework challenges? So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dean. Dean, take it away, sir.
All right, thanks. So what we've done at Checkpoint Technologies, and we mentioned before the number of engagements we've had with very, very senior engineers, we have developed numerous frameworks depending on the needs of the organization, the projects in scope. But what we came up with was what we now call RAFT. It's a reliable, reusable automation framework technology. So it's been implemented at several organizations very, very successfully. Every place that we've implemented, it's still being used today. And it's been handed off to their organization, very easy to understand, and they're rolling with it, scaling it up, maintaining it. It's been working incredibly well at those organizations that we've implemented it in. Again, number of years of experience backing this framework. We talked about maintenance being a key, and you'll see in a minute how it minimizes maintenance. Again, only one piece of code or action or function related to a business process of your application under test. It's really a logical framework. I've worked with some frameworks. I'm telling you, the complexity just is mind-boggling. As a matter of fact, there was one where it took a manual tester about 90 seconds to do a process. It took over 2 hours to automate that same process and test it out. That's how painful this framework was. There's no ROI in that. I don't know how many times you have to run that to get your ROI on it, but it's worthless. Very, very tough. So keep it simple and easy to implement. It is very scalable. And by that, what we mean is so you have a current application you're developing automation for, a new process comes on board or a new requirement, you can very easily scale it up to include that new process. Also, new applications that you want to onboard to your automation framework very, very easily can include other applications under test and easily include them in the same test for some integration testing. All right, and it's very agile. Agile being modifiable, easy to work with, and also very, very nicely fits into your agile development environment. And even if you're not using agile, it doesn't discount that. It's great for waterfall as well. As a matter of fact, one of the organizations that we implemented is a very strong waterfall-based SDLC, and it worked great in that as well. Features, it is a hybrid framework. 90+% of frameworks end up being some sort of hybrid framework. And RAFT is a combination of data and business process framework types. And again, it's very visual, very logical. We'll show it to you in just a minute. We like to consider it elegant. The front end is very simple and robust to understand, very simple to maintain, very simple to create tests, and it utilizes an Excel front end. There's also a back end to most frameworks. And in this case, the back end of RAFT contains dozens and dozens of out-of-the-box functions that allow you to work with many technologies that are already supported by UFT, as far as object classes and that sort of thing. And then other, they're represented by add-ins. If you understand Quick Test UFT, there's a number of add-ins. So we've implemented against a number of those technologies supported, but then the other technologies are very, very easily added if that needs to be done for your organization. And then when it comes to third-party objects, teller controls, infragistics controls, things like that we find out in the market quite a bit. We've developed solutions for those. So those are not supported by UFT Quick Test Pro, but RAFT can work against those objects as well. So it leverages the skills of all your QA resources. So one of the points to a good automation framework is that not everybody who works within the framework to develop automation needs to understand the code or the tool in which the framework was developed in. Okay, so they don't have to understand when it comes to UFT. They don't understand VB script and good scripting structure, automation methodologies, things like that. All they have to understand is how to use Excel and a little bit of training around how to use the front-end Excel, and they can be a part of the automation effort in your organization. The results that are pumped out from Raft, it does use UFT's report, but if you've seen those reports, they're very painful to drill down and find what you're looking for. All that is stripped out. All the steps are very readable, very standard conventions for the description and the details of every step, whether it's an input or a verification step, and screenshots are captured as needed, things like that already built into Raft. One of the challenges with some frameworks that we've seen that use Excel as a front end is how do you debug your tests? So you develop this test and you run it and you find an issue midway through. Well, with the frameworks, you end up having to run the whole thing from top to bottom again. With Raft, you can tell it to start and stop on whatever row of data that you want, any iteration that you want. You can also tell it to skip iterations as well, sometimes somewhere in the middle if you need to. And that's just simple using a keyword in one of the tabs in Excel. And Raft reads that and knows where to stop and start and know what rows to skip. So very, very simple to debug your automated tests. When it comes to sharing, one of the challenges with many frameworks is how do you share data from, it could be from one application to another if you're doing some integration testing, or it could be from one process to another. So your application maybe creates a loan or creates a customer, whatever it happens to be. You now need to capture that number and share it down line in a subsequent process that needs to use that customer to add whatever feature it needs to add. Using Excel, it's very, very simple. We have output parameters. We'll take a look at the different parameters, but it writes that value out to a cell, and you know where that's going to be. And then you're just using a simple Excel formula that can be shared into wherever input you want it to go into. Very, very simple. And the other really cool part is, and another strong feature of a well-developed framework is that Excel scripts, those automated scripts, can be written even before the business processes have been scripted or developed in UFT. So once you understand the processes and the input parameters and all the parameters that are required for that process, you can create that sheet in Excel and start developing the scripts in there by just supplying data where you need to supply it. That can then be run once the back end, that process is automated, then you can run the test, the script. But in the meantime, it's so logical, you can build it out without really running the test. Very simple. Clicking. Someone move those slides for me, please. Thank you. So Raft works with a number of different types of parameters. Some of these are common. Input and output parameters, of course, are required by any automation solution. We also include expected parameters. So if a parameter begins with EXP or expected, whatever it happens to be, those values in there become the expected value of a verification point in your script. And so it just compares it, returns a pass or fail based on whatever was entered in there. There's also this decision or branching parameters. And the decision parameters drive the path of the process flow. So say at the end of a web page, you have to either click a button or click a link to move on to the next page. And you just tell it the last parameter is button to click or link to click. And you give it the name of the button or link, and Raft will click that button or link and move you on to the next page, and also then verify that the next page appears as well. All right, so those are decision parameters. Again, very logical, very simple to picture in your mind, very easy to train manual testers and non-technical people on how to use. So here's an example. All right, so on the top we see it's kind of a blank sheet there, but the point here is each of those tabs represents a business process in your application under test. So there's a logon, there's a registration process, manage profile, manage equipment, whatever it happens to be, however your application is broken up, whatever it does, you document that, build your automation around it. Again, it makes it very modular. So this is the front end. In the back end, there's a process, a UFT process, that runs that AUT registration process in your application under test, utilizing the data from these parameters that you see up top there. So looking at those parameters, there's input parameters like second answer would be, on a security page. You're supplying the answer in a drop-down from a drop-down list for your security question. There's a like click change go button is simply a yes or no. Do I want to click the change go button? Do I want to, and there's also expected parameters. If you look down the bottom there, expected error message. It's a negative scenario. I'm expecting a message that says your username and password was incorrect. I can put that in there and it verifies that message appears on the screen without any scripting whatsoever because it's already done in the background. Okay. So down on the bottom screenshot, that's a scenario that represents a login process for an application that handles both positive and negative scenarios. So the first two rows of data, row 2 and 3, are negative scenarios. So it logs in using IE, the QA environment, enters a username and password documented there, clicks the sign in button. We expect an error message. If we get the error message, we get a pass condition. If it somehow logs in and it shouldn't, we get a fail condition because that error message did not appear there. Same with the second row. The third row is a positive scenario, and we don't expect an error message. We then expect some links to appear, and those links are based on, say, the user's credentials, or whoever logs in. So we expect multiple links. Each link there, expected link, is separated by a tilde. And what that simply means is that every link there has a separate verification point, and you get a pass and fail individually. Even though it's all in one step, basically, in one cell here, we have multiple verification points separated by that tilde. Okay? So you can see how simple this is. You simply create from the top there, you have a template of processes in your Excel workbook that can be utilized for your automating your application under test. You take what sheets you need off of there, move them in the order of execution, provide the values in the iterations, in multiple iterations, and Raft will read that data and run exactly what you tell it to do there. And documents, screenshots, the whole 9 yards. Very, very simple process. So how would your organization implement Raft? All right, we say it is a very simple structure, very manageable, commonsensical type of automation methodology. So in the end, your organization can be trained to do it, and it doesn't take much to do that. If you have some technical folks we can train, some manual testers to use the front end, your organization can implement Raft with a little bit of training, or we can help you. Checkpoint Technologies can come in for a few weeks, help you get up and running, or however long you need us to help you out. Okay? So the process is simply this. The process is documenting your application's business processes. And if you have automation in place now and you haven't done that, please at least go back and do that. Okay? You don't want to develop your automation around your test cases that you're automating. As they're written, you want to break out those test cases and look at the different processes they're sharing and automate around those processes. Put those processes together, and that becomes your test. That's exactly what Raft does. Another thing would be a technical analysis. So maybe not every object is recognized by UFT, or UFT may recognize it but not interact with it very well. We just need to do a quick analysis, make sure everything's working cleanly. We may have to create some wrapper functions around that just to make sure it's working well and seamlessly. And then 3 and 4 are really done simultaneously. All right. So you're developing those processes in Raft, and you'll see in just a minute on an example of that, what that looks like. So developing those processes in UFT that represent the processes in your application. And at the same time, create those sheets, a workbook, add a sheet with the same process name, add the parameters that were determined, that were required for that process, and you create that worksheet. And in the end, your scripts can be built. Once that worksheet is ready, you can build your script. The automated process might not be ready yet, but once it's ready, you'll be able to run that process or those multiple processes together. So here's an example. So what we have here is I say simple, but it's a very robust automation solution for a login scenario. So this is a data-driven login scenario, handles both positive and negative scenarios. So for each row, it checks for the application to exist. If it does, it closes everything. It's a browser-based application. If you're familiar with QuickTest or UFT, worked with it for a while, you're familiar with Mercury Tors, and that's what this is based on. So if the login, checks for the login page to be there. If it's not, returns a fail condition, takes a screenshot, exits the test. If the application doesn't come up, there's no reason to continue running, right? So stop the thing from running. If it's up and running, we simply log in, username and password, click the sign in button, and then check for whatever condition we want to pass or fail condition on that last statement there. Again, capturing screenshots with a fail condition and writing it out to a location, okay? So that's without Raft. So with Raft, the same process is simply a few lines of code. I say code. It's simply objects, methods, and the parameter value that it's referencing. There's no logic here. All the logic is done in the background. So what you saw in the background there is packaged right here. Okay. There are some. You see, there's some custom methods. Verify exist, verify messages, FW click, things like that that accept parameters, parameter input to make decisions on whether or not to execute that step. Click that button, verify those messages, so on and so forth. And this actually does more than that code in the background, because the verify messages, there was just no way to fit it on one page. It's quite a process to verify multiple what amounts to web elements, text sitting on a web page that could possibly exist. Okay, take screenshots in the background. The other really cool part is those screenshots. One of the concerns is, okay, we're capturing screenshots for everything, but that's going to fill up our server really fast. Well, those images are saved in two different locations. If you're running in debug, it saves them to your local machine. If you're running in true regression, and there's a way we determine that, you can save them on a shared drive somewhere. So it separates those images, keeps the ones you want, doesn't keep the ones you don't want. All right, so in a nutshell, if you can see by that previous example, it can decrease your code by 70% at least, and that's your process code. A lot of the work is already done. That is much less development time, no logic in that case, very little maintenance, very little error, prone to errors. Okay, very, very straightforward. A little training, and anybody can create these tests.
Fantastic. Thanks, Dean. So I'm going to take over with the summary, and then rather than torture you all with any of my bad jokes, we're going to try to get to a couple of some great questions. We've got a lot of questions. So to summarize what we discussed, we talked about how test automation is absolutely critical to stay ahead of the competition. You want to be able to deliver higher quality applications to market faster. There are many pitfalls that await the organizations attempting to develop a test automation solution, so you do have to be careful about that. We shared with you different ways to avoid some of those pitfalls, specifically focused on decreasing maintenance, better tracking of progress, and increasing success with test automation. And we shared with you how a robust, reliable, and reusable framework such as Raft which is a solution we've developed, and right out of the gate, you can start realizing an ROI very quickly. We shared that. That is one way to do so, where we've done that at many organizations. So I am now going to turn it over to Brent. And Brent, why don't you get to a few of the questions?
Absolutely, yeah. Just to be respectful of everybody's time here, we'll ask a few questions before we close out. One of the ones that came in is, one of the challenges is to identify business processes into reusable modules. It is not always cut and dry. What are some of the guidelines and ways identifying business processes to avoid duplication and increase reuse?
That is a great question. So in RAFT, what we recommend and what we've done in other organizations is, if you can't break it out by process, it's kind of tough to do, like you said. If it's like a web environment, you can break it out by page or by multiple pages, some kind of logical breaking point between this step and that step. Could be one page, could be multiple pages. But then what we do is make sure every possibility of how that page or those several pages can be utilized in a test are represented in that automated process that represents that applications process. So it can be used in any way that a manual tester would utilize those pages in that process. But yeah, it can be kind of open to debate sometimes if your application is really fluid that way, and that's in many cases it is that way.
And one of the tips that I would suggest to help you, just sure that you don't duplicate a lot of different processes and that you can increase reuse. A lot of times when you've got a reusable component, it's hard for other team members to find that component. Mm-hmm. So what's important is to have a solid test planning tool and a way to mark or label those different components as being reusable, and have a naming convention so that it's easier for other team members to find the business process and see that it's already been automated. That helps avoid redundancy and duplication. So thank you for that question.
Yeah, I'm sorry. That's a great point, Bob. In one organization, we used ALM's requirements module to document what process that we need to develop, and then we can see who's assigned to it, the state that it's in, and it was just a great piece of documentation that we could then report on to management. And that goes back to managing expectations and reporting progress. It's a good question.
Thank you, guys. All right, well, the next one up is, you mentioned UFT QTP as the core technology behind RAFT. What about non-UFT shops? Can you build the framework using Selenium or other major scripting technologies?
So that I don't know, Bob, you want to take that, or?
Yeah, go ahead. I'll start off with that. So as a matter of fact, we are very excited to announce that we are creating RAFT, our prepackaged framework, in Selenium, and we expect to roll that out, if all goes well, by the end of the year. And then, and Dean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I mean, if an organization wanted to create their own framework from scratch, they could certainly do so in any technology, but it's a labor-intensive effort, and RAFT helps save that effort and the cost and expense and risk associated with it just right from the beginning.
Exactly right, and we've seen a number of organizations attempt frameworks and then, a couple months down the road just realize they're going in the wrong direction. It's not meeting expectations. It's not providing the value it's supposed to provide. And then you have those thousands of man hours wasted possibly. They have to go back to the drawing board. So we are, say what Bob said, we're excited about getting the RAFT framework to working in Selenium, and we have resources working on that now, so we're excited to get that in place, and we'll let you know when it's ready.
Great, thank you so much. So this is going to be the last question just because we are already a minute over, but I wanted to ask this. We've tried frameworks before and they all have had major flaws. What makes this one different? Dean, let's start with you.
Well, I understand that. I've seen a number of frameworks, and there's no perfect framework, okay? And there's no perfect framework for your environment, for your applications you need to test. But we've implemented RAFT against numerous technologies, and so far it has fit every standard that we've placed it against. So it's just been a proven. It's not something that that's risky. It's been proven out in the real world against multiple environments in numerous organizations. And so one thing we would do is help you understand, does RAF fit your organization? We would say most likely it does, but we would help you make that determination.
Great. All right, so before we close out today, I just wanted to mention a few of Checkpoint Technologies' upcoming events. We'll be at STPCon September 19th through the 22nd in Dallas, Texas at the Expo, and Bob will actually be giving a presentation titled The Internet of Things, Exciting Impact on Testing. That's September 22nd. So if you're planning to be at that conference, don't miss out on that. A few weeks after that, we will be out in Anaheim, California at the Star West Conference, so make sure to stop by our booth there. Those dates are October 2nd through the 7th. And the very next week, October 10th through the 13th, we are in San Jose, California for the Atlassian Summit. We are very excited to be sponsoring this conference and hope you can join us there. I wanted to invite the audience to reach out to either of our presenters today with any questions you may have or anything your organization may need assistance with. I'm going to leave their contact information up for just a few more minutes to allow anyone to take notes. If you didn't get a chance to ask a question today, but you want to ask a follow-up question, feel free to contact them. I do encourage everyone here to take the very short survey at the end of this webinar, letting us know how we did and whether you'd like us to contact you within the next few days, few weeks, or anytime soon. So with that, on behalf of myself, Bob Cruz, Dean Carvin, and everyone here at Checkpoint Technologies, we really hope you enjoyed our webinar and hope you have a great rest of your day.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. Great questions. Thank you. Bye now.
Thank you very much. Have a good day.